Welcome to the Hill with Jill podcast. This is episode 13, and I will be discussing structure versus flexibility and your preference for one over the other. Welcome to the Hill with Jill podcast. I'm your host, Jill Yiter. Each week, I share one short, digestible episode to help you create clarity and ease in your wellness story. I'll be exploring self-care, intuition, mindfulness, intentional living, and more. If you enjoy a fresh perspective, agree that life is not black and white, and want to improve your relationship with yourself, then you're in the right place. In the last episode, I introduced kind of your preferences based on personality, and one of these preferences is if you tend to enjoy more structure in your life or more flexibility. And when I think of structure, I think of things such as planning and organization and systemizing and to-do lists and calendars. And when I think of flexibility, I think of going with the flow, being accommodating, flying by the seat of my pants, thinking on my feet, being impulsive, and just kind of waiting to see what happens. And so even if you have, which you probably do, a preference for one over the other, as we have our chat today, it's just good to note that it's good to be savvy, to be able to recognize when one is not serving you and to be able to kind of float between the two, even though you have one that you're more comfortable with. So for me, I actually prefer and tend to fall towards the structure side of things. So structure, I feel like, is particularly helpful to me if I feel anxious or ungrounded or just unsafe, or like lots of things are out of my control in my life. Then I tend to want more structure, and it can be helpful and calming, but I do have to watch for the pitfall of using it to over control my feelings or elements that are outside of my control. So it can have it's helpful to a point, but then it reaches a place where it's like, okay, I recognize now that I'm trying to just like over control the situation. So I also find structure really helpful if I've kind of pinned down what it is that I want to improve in an area of my life. And then I'm able to allocate time and then dedicate my focus and my energy to improving whatever that is. So, for example, high performers and athletes, they follow a training schedule for a reason. It has flow within that structure, but that structure allows for kind of systematic improvement. And then, so on the flip side of that, flexibility, I find flexibility can be really helpful if I just am feeling stuck or just downright bored. If I recognize that I am in a routine or a structure that is no longer serving me and I need to get out of that rut, I need to get some fresh energy into my life, then flexibility can be really, really helpful. Flexibility is also really helpful when you're in the baby step, like the new seeds of kind of investigating something new that you're curious about and that you want to maybe get better at. So in that phase, there needs to be less structure, in my opinion. There needs to be just heaps of play and wiggle room. And on the one hand, there maybe is a little bit of structure because you allocate time. But then within that time, you play around heaps and you get to experiment and fiddle around until something kind of starts to take form. And then once it takes form, you then get to decide if you would like to create some more structure and systemization and order around it. And then if you do that, I feel like the benefit to that is that it kind of becomes integrated where there isn't so much mental energy taken up with it. And so it becomes integrated into your life. And then you can kind of go back to the flexibility process with something else new until it's ready to kind of be added in a more structured form. So I feel like those are just kind of some examples for, when one is more helpful than the other. Um, and you, like I said, you probably have a pretty clear preference for one over the other, but just remember that it's important to be savvy and to recognize when one is no longer serving you. So, for example, there can be disconnect on either end. So, a to-do list can get abused by trying to over control a situation, or over planning can get abused by using it to avoid taking action when that's actually more appropriate. And on the flexibility side of things, it can be passed off as, oh, I'll just deal with that later, or I'll just wait and see what happens, when maybe it's something that actually needs your attention, like you're stuck and something really needs your attention and a bit of a plan or some structure around it for how to move through it. So I'm going to leave you with a few questions that I found helpful for myself. So, as I was thinking through this and writing it and now talking about it, I feel like it kind of all maybe centers around a core belief of how much control you feel like you have over your experience and how you choose to exert that control. So, and it's not that there's a perfect answer, it's just kind of an interesting um, notion to think about. Yeah, how much control do I feel like I have over my experience? And then does that perceived sense of control or lack of control, does that influence your preference for structure or flexibility? And then just, are you able to recognize when structure would be more appropriate and to accept it and to use it as your friend? And then are you able to recognize when flexibility would be more appropriate, and again, to utilize it in a way that serves you, and then to kind of toggle back and forth between the two so that you can always get yourself kind of unstuck when your just whole countenance or your whole flow gets kind of jammed up. So I think that that's kind of what's really important. So we all have comfort spots, and I talked a little bit in the last episode about playing to your strengths. So for me, playing to my strength is definitely systemizing, organizing, planning, but it doesn't mean that there's not room for that flexibility element as well. And it's not about over controlling or trying to fix things or overcompensate, but it's just, I find it satisfying. I find it satisfying to put some structure around something, and just mentally I do better in that space on average. It kind of calms my nervous system. So I hope that was maybe helpful and gets you thinking a little bit more about your own preference for structure or flexibility, and then also recognizing that it's healthy to be able to have both. So I look forward to talking to you again really soon, and I thank you so much for joining me today. Take care, and bye for now. Thanks for joining me this week on the Hill with Jill podcast. You can find all my free resources, including menu planners, mindful movement videos, and more, as well as my coaching and courses at hillwithjill.com. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you'd share it with a friend. Take care, and bye for now.